This is another one of those films that I didn't really have high hopes for. I mean, I'm not the kind of person that usually goes to see the raunchy comedies of the past few years on a regular basis, and it didn't really help that most of the advertising campaign was playing up the fact that Jennifer Aniston was playing a stripper. With comedies like these, you usually end up with two kinds of films. You either have one type that uses all their good material in an advertising campaign and has only crap remaining when you actually go to see it, or you have some comedies that use some good material in the advertising campaign, but then save some of the bits, some of the really good bits, as well as some of the bits they can't actually air on TV for when you actually go into theaters. So, which one does We're the Millers fall under? Let's find out as we begin this episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, the first thing I feel that I must mention is that there are definitely some parts in the film that feel like they were edited in various ways so that they would avoid an NC17 rating. And for those of you who don't know, NC17 is basically the rating that's above R, basically means that nobody under the age of 17 will be admitted, and so most theaters don't usually show NC17 films because of various reputational stuff, and the fact that most studios don't make them because a lot of theaters would choose not to show them. I mean, especially if you live in states like Utah, well, if you have an NC-17 rated film, don't expect it to be seen in Utah. Of course, then again, if you have a film featuring homosexual cowboys, you can't really expect it to be shown in Utah. Anyways, it should then come as no surprise that this film features some pretty crude moments. Thankfully, it manages to balance things out with some less off-color jokes. They're not super tame because the premise of the film doesn't entirely allow for that, but they at least allow some breathing room between some of the more heavy-hitting jokes. There were some jokes that I wasn't entirely partial towards, as some of the comedic moments were used to more or less set up subplots that, while resolved by the end of the film, didn't really bring that much to the story. There are also moments in the film where things can get a little too over the top, and it just kind of feels that the moments are going a few beats too long in terms of pacing. This is especially applicable to a lot of the jokes where the punchline is, well, an awkward pause. Now, this may just be personal preference, but when you have multiple scenes where painfully awkward pauses are the punchline, it can get kind of tiresome after a while. The only other thing I can really knock this film for is that the ending feels a tad too schmaltzy. It's almost things just wrap up a little too perfectly, and the amount of conveniences that are layered in the ending are, well, a tad too convenient. I'm not saying that everything needs to end super dramatically like it does in some comedies, but it's just a case where things are kind of too perfect. I understand it's a comedy, but it's just a case where everything was a little too saccharine at the end. Looking at the film overall, I still found myself being entertained, mostly because it was better than I expected. I mean, like I said, I had pretty low expectations going into the film, and so I was pleasantly surprised. However, it's not the kind of film you can just see with anybody at any time, as the raunchy off-color humor may be a tad off-putting if you're not prepared for it. Now, while the plot lines are a tad predictable, the characters in this film are at least endearing enough that they can kind of carry us through the story. I mean, granted you get the usual, oh, they grow closer as a family over the course of the film. You can see it coming, but at least the characters are well developed enough that you can at least enjoy the story and enjoy the chemistry between the different actors. In terms of comedic styling, this film opts for the somewhat classical, but also somewhat contemporary style where you take your basic plot points, add raunchy humor as a base, inject some non-raunchy jokes for balance, and then present it as, well, a comedy with a wide spectrum of humor, as opposed to comedies like This Is the End, which charge full steam ahead when it comes to raunchiness, kind of ratcheting up the shock humor with each scene. And so this film is a lot more like other comedies that have come out this year, kind of like Tower Heist per se, except slightly raunchier than Tower Heist. That's the comparison I can give it. All in all, it's a decent film for people who like the more off-color comedies that Hollywood has been cranking out for the past few years. So if you like those comedies, you'll enjoy it. All that said, I give We're the Millers a 4 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. Tune in Thursday for my review of Elysium. See you then.